There's not a lot to know about this Kentucky basketball team currently because they just haven't played a game together. But Mark Pope wants to see this team get exposed early in their schedule.
You are Locked On Kentucky, your daily podcast on the Kentucky Wildcats, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, what's going on, Big Blue Nation? Welcome on into Locked On Kentucky, your daily Kentucky Wildcats podcast. I'm your host, Lance Dawe, and on today's episode of Locked On Kentucky, we are going to be taking a look at what Mark Pope had to say during SEC Media Days. Going to break this up into three different segments, playing you clips from his main media interviews. Obviously, I was in attendance, and I got to ask him a question about the pace and the tempo. That's coming in the second segment. But the first segment, we're going to dive into what Mark Pope had to say about the improvement across the roster, the relationship with Coach Calipari, how the starters and the finishers may differ here in terms of rotation, and what really matters there. Got a ton to dive into today. Really appreciate you guys tuning in. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can place your first $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That is over at FanDuel.com to get started. Thank you so much for making Locked On Kentucky your first listen every single day. Want to remind everyone out there that we are free and available on all platforms. And if you are watching on YouTube, I would greatly appreciate it if you subscribe to the show. And if you're listening on podcast, I would also appreciate it if you subscribe there as well. All right, let's go ahead and get into it. So before we roll the clip, just want to remind you guys, we are going to break this up into three different sections, picking the most important questions from the main media. This is from SEC Media Days, which was in, I believe, Mountain Brook, Alabama, just outside of Birmingham. Every single coach was there, 2 players for each team. We'll get to what Lamont Butler and Jaxson Robinson had to say on the next episode of Locked On Kentucky. But for today, this is what Pope had to say at the beginning of his press conference. He talked about where to improve as far as communication. He talked about his relationship with Coach Cal, and he talked about the starters and the finishers and maybe what matters in late game situations. So without further ado, here is Mark Pope at SEC Media Days.
Ben Roberts, Lexington Herald leader. You guys obviously have been together on the court for about 4 months now, a little less than 3 weeks until the opener. What's the biggest challenge, or where do you want to see more improvement in a specific area before then?
Yeah, so we're blessed to have a really veteran group that's got a ton of experience, that's got no experience with each other. And so it's been, since the very, very first day that we were together, it's been a major piece of focus for our guys to understand us and understand each other and try and fit together and communicate with each other. And so that's been the biggest part for us. We have guys that bring in exactly the skill sets that we're looking for in this first year, and it's just a matter of us growing together. And that's something that we've done extraordinarily well, I think, over the course of the summer. I've been really proud of our guys, and into the fall and into banner camp, and then the next step for us is to actually get on a court and play against somebody else and start coming together that way too. And so I think we're well on our way in the process, and we're excited for the next steps.
Hey, Mark. Bob Holt, Arkansas Democrat. You can probably guess what I'm going to ask you about. Actually, a two-parter, if that's okay. I covered Jaxson Robinson at Arkansas. It seems like about 1 million years ago. I know he's older and he's developed. I was wondering, what kind of player is he? Why is he the kind of guy you wanted to bring to Kentucky? And then I've seen photos and videos of you and Cal on the recruiting trail. I wonder, how would you describe your all's relationship? And, he's staying in the league, but you're replacing him. Just kind of, what do you think about that dynamic?
Yeah, I could talk about Jax for days. We've been really blessed. I've been blessed to coach him now, going on my 3rd season coaching him. And one of the great things in coaching is getting to watch young men just grow. And Jax came to us, as a 2-time transfer with a ton of potential that was unrealized, with maybe some battle scars from difficult times that we all have, that we all go through as we're trying to grow into players. And to watch him become an extraordinary leader, to grow into that, to become a guy that is constantly reaching out to players on his team to build relationships, to see him increase his intensity level with the physicality of the game and the intensity of the game, and to really, really embrace that, to see him to grow into a player that kind of faces every situation with a level of fearlessness, and clearly his ability to shoot the ball and his length. He's a multifaceted player, and it's a real gift for me as a first-year head coach at the University of Kentucky to have a veteran and seasoned, extraordinarily talented player like Jaxson, who's grown into a terrific leader. So I'm incredibly grateful to be able to coach him one more year, and on a personal level, to kind of finish this journey that we got to start 3 years ago is really exciting for me. And you'll never hear me say a negative word about Coach Cal, because there's not a lot to say. He's a Hall of Fame coach. As a diehard Kentucky fan and alumnus and former player, I'm grateful for everything, all the incredible things that Cal accomplished at the University of Kentucky, and he's also been a good friend. He's been a terrific mentor, and he's always been generous to Leanne and I as we've gone through our coaching journey, and so we wish him the best in everything that he does, and we'll forever be grateful for everything that he did at Kentucky, and we'll be cheering for him every day like crazy except for February 1st.
Ryan Black with the Louisville Courier-Journal. Mark, last week at the team media day in Lexington, you were asked your philosophy on starting lineups and things like that. And you mentioned that, well, for us, finishing the game is more important than who's maybe in the starting lineup. But in terms of at the end of games, do you feel like there's an importance in identifying a go-to guy or one or two kind of guys in these late game situations, or do you feel like that allows opponents to kind of predicate too much on one guy and you want to have five guys out there who potentially could take a game-winning shot?
Yeah, sorry, I'm giving you the same answer. It's going to be both, right? It's both. Actually, both are true. To have some guys that you really believe in, you can rely on, and also have a team that functions together. Very rarely are we a team that plays to get one particular guy, one particular shot in one particular moment. I actually don't think the game calls for that. I think those circumstances are far and few between. They exist, but I think they're far and few between the way the game is played now. Now it's about putting the right guys in the right action with the right decision makers, with kind of fueling them with the right anticipation of what coverage they're going to see and how they're going to see it, and then let them execute accordingly. So that's what we work towards. But certainly there's going to be, it's not just going to be the right guy, but it's going to be the right combination of guys at the right moments with the right matchups where we're trying to steer them into the right actions. That part is very, very important. And you can see all the variables we just introduced to the conversation, right? Kind of the arithmetic of it is to call on one guy and call his number, and the calculus of it is to start to consider all the different variables and actually mesh a group together that's going to function late in the game. And that's why coaching is so fascinating, right? That's why I love it so much. But so it's both. Sorry.
I find it really interesting that the emphasis right now for Mark Pope and the staff is on communication. It seems like, based on what we've seen from highlight videos, what we've seen from different practices, the team can run an offense and play defense pretty well. I think that's evident. It's about the little nitty-gritty details, because I think this is something that gets lost in the fold when talking about all of the experience and the veteran leadership. Kentucky has not played a game together yet. They just simply have not done that. Later on in today's show, you're going to see Mark Pope talk about how Kentucky wants to get exposed so they can sort of identify some of these problems, one of them currently being communication. One of them currently being figuring out how to get everybody on the same page consistently. I really do hope that that's something that Kentucky is able to figure out early in the slate, because if they do, they'll be able to pick up some really solid victories, I think, in the non-conference. So we'll continue this breakdown of what happened at SEC Media Days. We've got the SEC strength, what Mark Pope has to say about the strength of the conference, as well as him answering a question of mine. Before we dive into that, though, I do want to tell you guys about our friends over at Roy. So far this season, we have pooled over $10,000 to support players over on Roy. Micro deposits lead to a massive change. And with the Roy app, you can direct your support to the athletes you love, ensuring that all funds go to the specific player you choose. Because unlike collectives, you know exactly where your support is going. And if you can even receive exclusive content like personal videos and updates after the season. And the best part, all of this is risk-free. If the athlete transfers or doesn't deliver the content, you can get your money back. And this week, we've been supporting Dane Key for a hot minute here, and I want to support Derek Jaxson this week. I just pitched in $100, and I'd love for you to join me. Even $10 makes a difference. Let's show Jaxson the love and keep him connected to our school. He's a senior. He's had a phenomenal season so far, played really well in the game against Vanderbilt, had the lone interception that Diego Pavia has thrown all season long. Jaxson having a phenomenal season. Love him and hope that he keeps connected to UK. You can remember to pay today, celebrate tomorrow, and your support will help set up Kentucky for success. Plus, don't miss out on Roy's exciting giveaway. You can win 2 tickets to a game in November. All you have to do is download Roy, create an account, enter referral code Locked On, and you are entered. If you're already on Roy, any contribution to an athlete's campaign also gets you entered automatically. No purchases necessary. Avoid where prohibited. Pretty straightforward, awesome stuff. You can download Roy now and join the NIL game with no subscriptions and no fees. Be sure to check us out on Instagram, Facebook, and X at Roy_return_on-you for more info. That is Roy. Support the players, change the game. All right, continuing along here on the Tuesday edition of Locked On Kentucky. Lance Dawe hanging out here with you. I really appreciate you guys checking out the show today. If you have not subscribed to the YouTube channel or the podcast feed, I would greatly appreciate it if you did so. We're breaking down what Mark Pope had to say at SEC Media Days, and we're going to kind of dive into Pope's thoughts on an analytics question that I asked him after we roll this clip. But first, he's talking about the strength of the SEC, the strength of this conference, just how good the league is. We're actually going to talk a little bit after the fact, I will with you, about what some of the KenPom numbers say preseason about the SEC and the Kentucky Wildcats. So let's go ahead and roll that clip. Here is Mark Pope again at SEC Media Days.
Jack Pilgrim, KSR. What can you say about the strength of the SEC? You're kind of entering it at its peak, and as many as 10, 11 teams in the NCAA tournament. Just what can you say about it kind of going in as high as it is?
Yeah, so we walked into the Big 12 last year for the first time in the toughest league in the country, and you know, as things go, we get to walk into the toughest league in the country now in the SEC a year later. It's pretty remarkable. I mean, I think 9 teams are in the top 25, and it's 40%, you know, forgive my math, it might be a little stretch, but, you know, 38% of the top 25 is in our conference alone. And that's pretty astonishing. It actually reminds me of when I played here 30 years ago. This league was just so dominant. It seems like that's where it's posturing to be right now. And just in reference to our experience in great leagues, I probably had more fun coaching than I've ever had before last year in the Big 12. Is such an incredibly competitive league. Every single game you play is against the top 25 opponent. The SEC venues, you know, is per usual, you know, Kentucky was right there at the top of attendance charts last year, but we have 3 teams, 3 venues in the top 5 in the country in terms of attendance. You go on and on about this league, but right now it is a gauntlet that is to be respected and probably feared a little bit, and all of that feeds exactly into what we love about this game. So we're incredibly blessed to be here in this league when it's so powerful, so strong, and it's really setting the standard for college basketball right now, and can't wait to get to it.
Lance Dawe, Locked On Kentucky coach. I know you and your staff are really big into analytics, so I've got a numbers question here for you. Last year, according to KenPom, you guys were 84th nationally in adjusted tempo. Do you anticipate playing faster than that this year? And if so, does the experience that you brought in kind of help that?
Yeah, so tempo is really important to us. You know, we talk about pace, space, and extra pass, and we're really keen on the thrust of the game, kind of that initial thrust of the game. And then across half court, we also talk a lot about pace in the half court, even on dead balls when you walk it up, and kind of igniting pace in the half court is incredibly important to us. And so we would like to stay squarely in the top third of the country, which is where we live. And if we could get to the top 6 of the country, top 7th of the country, that would be really important to us. I think good offense comes with pace for sure. And that's just, the low-hanging fruit on that is transition offense. The more interesting part of that is the pace of your movement away from the ball, the start and finish of cuts, kind of navigating the court where you're overloading certain sides, and all of that comes together, and all of it's really important. Not all of that is contained in that Ken Pom stat, but some of it is.
Okay, so a couple of things here. Mark Pope explaining that tempo and adjusted tempo here on Ken Pom is not just about the pace of play in transition offense, right? He said obviously that's a big part of it. It's something that whenever you think of a fast team, you think of, the way they run up and down the court and the way they get the ball in the hole quickly. Teams like Kentucky and even teams like Alabama, they play with tempo, they play with pace, and like Pope's talking about, they play with an intent, with a purpose to get that first thrust going at the beginning of the game, start out strong, and then to also simultaneously finish strong in terms of tempo. Jordan Sperber, who is now on staff at Mississippi State, we had him on the show earlier this year. He's coached against Pope, and he talks in some of his YouTube videos about how important tempo is throughout the course of a game, both at the beginning and the end. And then also he talks about the importance of tempo, and this is something that Pope just mentioned, within the half-court offense, right? It's not just about flying up and down the court, and something that Pope said at the very end there, not all of that is reflected in that Ken Pom stat, right? And I think that's really interesting that he points out, hey, what we want to do and the pace and the tempo, it's not all reflected within just one statistic on Ken Pom. And he's right. You can actually go and look at a variety of statistics that indicate just how fast BYU wanted to be on offense a season ago. Last year, like I mentioned to Pope, and I'll mention to you here again, they were 84th nationally in adjusted tempo. Hold that number in your mind while I continue this conversation. 84th nationally. You also have average possession length on Ken Pom. You can see the average possession length on defense, and you can see the average possession length on offense for both teams. If you go to BYU's page from a season ago, they were 63rd nationally instead of 84th in adjusted tempo. They were 84th in adjusted tempo, I should say. They were 63rd in average possession length. Why were they drugged down 20 spots in terms of adjusted tempo when their possession length was one of the fastest in the nation? Well, it's because of their defensive, I think, their ability on defense to hold opponents from scoring early. They were 251st in the country in average possession length on defense. So, both of those things combined together, you get a slower adjusted tempo. And honestly, I don't think that that's a bad thing at all. Now, what Pope said there at the end is also, I think I would agree with, if you can find a way to get into the top 6th, top 7th, while also, and I'll add this in, while also maintaining a solid defensive efficiency, I think you're going to be in a really, really good spot. If you can play with that tempo on offense while also maybe the possession length isn't as long as it's been in years past, but you're still efficiency-wise strong, you're going to win a lot of games. Full stop. If you are able to play 63rd nationally or higher, I think, in possession length and then adjusted tempo, you're going to be really solid. So there are 364 teams in college basketball. Last year, the percentage would have been, for Kentucky, they would have been in the top 4th. They would have been in the top 23%. You can see it right here on the calculator that I just showed on the screen. It would have been in the top 4th. Like he said, he wanted to stay in like the top 3rd, maybe top 6th, 7th would be elite. If you are, let's just say, top 60 out of 364 teams, you're then in the top 16%. So you're starting to get closer to kind of where you want to be there. I think, honestly, after hearing him explain it and knowing what we know about Ken Pom and their stats and kind of how things combat each other in terms of possession length and then tempo and so forth, I think that if you stay, I would say, somewhere between top 4th, top 5th, you probably don't want to finish with an adjusted tempo of much higher than that, because I think if you do, you're going to start to see some of the efficiencies that you have on defense slip a little. Because just simply speaking, teams are if you have a shorter possession length on defense, chances are teams are scoring against you quicker. Either they're getting up and down in transition really well against you, or they're finding opportunities in the half court, and that's just really not good. So if you're able to delay them from scoring longer, if you're able to work them deeper into the shot clock, so to speak, and you are able to maintain a very solid pace on the other end of the floor yourself, I think that that's a very healthy balance to have. Obviously, there are some stylistic differences between kind of what the elite teams are doing. There's a bunch of different ways that teams have found ways to win. For instance, UConn has one of the slowest offenses in the country for the last season, but they had the most efficient offense in the nation. They were also middling in terms of average possession length on defense. It was like just a couple of percentage, or a couple of milliseconds shorter than, not milliseconds, just like a fourth of a second slower, or faster rather, I should say, than Kentucky. I don't know what I'm saying here. Houston has found a way to win with pace, or rather a lack of pace on both ends of the floor. They were some of the slowest in the country on both ends. Duke last year they played with, I think, a decent amount of pace on offense, but they were really slow on defense. Alabama obviously found ways to win last year by being one of the fastest in the country on offense, like top 10, third in the country, on offense. So there are multiple ways to win here. I'm not saying that one is objectively better than the other, and I do think that Pope is correct in saying if we can kind of bump that up a little bit, I think we're going to be good. My take is if you can bump it up a little bit while also staying solid on defense, I think you're going to be good. So I agree with everything that Pope had to say there. It's really interesting about pace and tempo, and about what you do in the half court also really does matter, and it's not all reflected in just a singular KenPom statistic. So we're going to continue this. He talks about leaning on Jaxson Robinson. He talks about the challenges of communication. And then Mark Pope wraps it up by talking about how he wants Kentucky to get exposed, which is a really interesting phrase. And, of course, I'll let him explain it here in just a little bit. Before I do that, though, I want to tell you guys about our friends over at FanDuel. NFL fans, you can continue your season with a big return on FanDuel. It's America's #1 sportsbook. When you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats. You can view live play-by-play and so much more, all on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's all over at FanDuel.com. Again, get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's over at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, wrapping up the Tuesday edition of Locked On Kentucky. Lance Dawe hanging out here with you. So, we have continued to break down Mark Pope's conversations at SEC Media Days. We've talked about the improvement for this team. We've talked about the relationship with Cal. We've talked about the starters. We've talked about finishing. We've talked about tempo. Hopefully, you guys understand where I'm coming from on the tempo and the number stuff. It's not complicated. It's just I want to make sure that we get everything accurate here before we start running into the season, because Mark Pope made a great point about how not everything we want to do in terms of pace is reflected in a singular statistic. So we're going to have to be able to kind of watch this team and then see how they operate to really understand and appreciate the way that they like to play, which is fast. So we've got Kentucky head coach Mark Pope breaking down his relationship with Jaxson Robinson, how the team's going to lean on him, a story about making a trip to East Kentucky after the Hurricanes, challenges on communication, obviously, and then Mark Pope explaining why he wants Kentucky to get exposed. Here
Hey, Coach. Brad Harvey from College Sportscast. So to elaborate on Jaxson Robinson, he is the only player that has ever played for you in the past. Yeah. How are you going to lean on that, and how important is that going to be for his leadership role?
Yeah, I'll answer your question with a story. We did a team retreat to Eastern Kentucky. Still, people reeling from the floods. I know there's been, such recent disasters also. And the guys built a couple homes, relocation homes, and did some projects at individual people's homes. And then the last morning, we all gathered together In our little team devotional, each of the guys voiced one thing that they were going to really commit to this team. And I thought Jaxson Robinson was super insightful. He was really insightful, which he is. He's so intelligent. He said, guys, what I want to offer this team this year, among other things, is I want to be a translator. Not just translating the words and terminologies, helping do that with this coaching staff and with coach, but also a translator in terms of like how this game is supposed to feel when it's right, playing it the way that we do. And how guys are supposed to feel right about how they communicate, the urgency of our communication, all those kind of little things that are really feel things where Jax is actually capable of, hey guys, just pay attention because this is exactly how it's supposed to feel, right? And so, one of the ways that he's going to make a huge contribution is being a translator, and that's a real gift for me.
Wanted to ask you, obviously there's a lot of challenges that go into having a completely new roster and so many players coming in trying to learn your system, but what are some of the X's and O's challenges that you've faced in trying to get these transfers and these freshmen to all speak the same language as they come from different places and have to mold their terminology and what they know about offense, about defense to what you want them to be doing?
Yeah, so, I've been really blessed. I have a group of players that are incredibly curious. They're veteran guys. They've won a ton of games, and they've all done it different ways. But I have a locker room that's incredibly curious. It comes from humility, right? It's in this place of humility and curiosity, and it's how when you're blessed with those two character traits and you embrace them, you have a chance to grow really, really fast. And so I don't have a lot of guys that are trying desperately to hold on to a way they did it somewhere else or how they've done it before. I have a bunch of guys that are like, okay, like we're on a mission right now to come together kind of under one banner. And so it's been pretty smooth sailing in that sense. I mean, there's habits that have to change. There's mentality. I had an interesting conversation with Kobe Bray, who's, had the most efficient offensive season in the last decade in college basketball in a high mid-major or high major player, of any player in the last decade. And, we got in fights the first few weeks about like, why are you not shooting that shot? I need you to shoot that shot. Here he is, shot 50% from the three-point line last year. So there are spaces like that where our guys are learning to believe in what we do. And so that's a process, but we have a bunch of guys that are super humble and super curious, and that makes it a great process.
You mentioned playing outside competition for the first time. What can you learn playing against somebody else about your team that you can't learn at the Craft Center?
Well, the fun thing is where you get exposed, right? So you play against each other, you're playing a similar style because everybody's playing the same style in our gym, and so you're just hungry to get exposed. So show us what we don't know yet about our team. So we have 2 exhibitions against good teams. We're playing the defending national champ Division II team, and so we're going to get exposed, and we're just hungry. I have a group, like I said, that's humble and curious, and we're actually dying to get in the film room and be like, okay, show us what we're not doing well. Where are the holes and the cracks in what we do so that we can go fix them and we can build them back up. And that's what you get from playing other teams. And so we're really eager. We're at the point now where we're really eager to go face some opponents because what we need to do is we need to be a great team by the time March comes around, and we need to learn all that and take in all that information, and then learn the principles where we can combat the little holes that we have, and so that's what outside games do.
I'm hoping for Mark Pope and Kentucky's sake that they do get exposed to an extent, right? I hope that they are able to identify weaknesses early, as soon as possible. At the same time, I would like to see them find a way to work through that and still win games. I don't think Mark Pope would disagree, and I'm not implying that he's saying, I hope we lose some games so we start to figure out what we're kind of made of. Obviously, there's a difference between getting exposed in certain areas and losing outright. You have 2 games. Well, technically you have 4, but you have 2 games before you play Duke. You've got Kentucky Wesleyan, the exhibition game, right? You've got Minnesota State, another exhibition, and then you have Wright State and Bucknell, the 2 regular season games. You've got those contests to get yourself ready for Duke. I don't think at least I hope, knock on wood, I don't think any of those teams are going to give you enough problems to expose you in a sense. So it will really be up to, what does Duke throw at Kentucky? What does a team like Clemson throw at Kentucky? What does a team like Gonzaga throw at Kentucky? You don't want to just gloss over teams like Western Kentucky on your schedule either, who are coming to Rupp and could also be pretty good. How do the Wildcats, with all of their veteran experience, how do they respond to adversity? How do they respond to teams coming out there and hitting them in the mouth or hitting them in areas that they did not really anticipate or prepare to respond to, right? This is all about finding things out early, tweaking them, and then at the end of the day, the whole goal is to be ready for March. How do you prepare for that? I hope Kentucky's able to win through it. Hope they're able to win through the adversity. That's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Kentucky. Hey, you can follow the show on Twitter at Locked On UK. You can follow me on Twitter at @LanceDawe_. And you can also follow the show over on Instagram. That is at Kentucky Podcast. Any questions, comments, concerns, you can leave those in the YouTube comments below. You can also hit me on the socials. I will see you all tomorrow for another episode of Locked On Kentucky. Hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and God bless.